This meeting is being live streamed. I did not know you could do this. Let me just go back
I
here.
I did not either until literally like right now.
Okay, let's see. How does it work? Is it going to have a side by side, or is it just going to be doing like a Zoom meeting where?
I don't know. It's currently just showing you on the stream,
Yes.
which
Oh, wait
is
there. You can see me.
oh, I just called. Oh, no, we're both on it.
I can.
Can you see the
I
stream?
can. So I can hear us, but I can't see any video.
It's the reverse for me. I can see us.
You can't hear us.
I
Oh,
can see. I can do both. Yeah, I can hear and see us. It's actually working. We're live right now. Um,
maybe. But are you? Where are you looking at it from? Are you looking at it in the YouTube
I'm
studio?
just. I'm No, it's just on YouTube. I think you
Oh.
can just go onto my channel. It's
Because
Deep
I.
Noetics Council. I didn't think of a better name.
Oh, that
Um,
works. Oh, that's why. Because I'm in the old stream. Never mind. Yeah, that's why there was a delay in that.
right.
Live. Deep Noetics Cancel. Oh yeah, okay. The two of us are side by side. That works.
I just in case also recorded to this computer in case I mess something up.
Yeah, cool.
Right. Do you see the stream with both of us?
Yeah, I can see both of us are there. That's cool. It's
Okay.
so the last time, I don't know if you remember the last time we were doing I was a tiny person, like we were
Oh,
doing
we
the
were like
floating thing.
immersed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
every time we're doing some new experiment. Do you know what, the next time we'll do the Mark Zuckerberg and Lex Friedman thing where they were in VR. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see that. I mean, I,
The
I do have a green screen somewhere. Like I wouldn't
I've got a green
mind
screen
us.
just there. We can
Yeah.
do it right now.
I wouldn't mind next time. I wouldn't mind us being somewhere in outer space. I wouldn't mind us hanging
Yeah.
around at a petrol station, Jupiter.
So yeah, at the edge of what's the line from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? The something at the edge of the universe, the cafe at the edge of the universe, the diner
Yeah,
at the edge of the universe, something like
yeah. The Irish pub at the edge of the universe.
that. Yeah, I
I'd
like
be all
that.
for that. All right. Okay. Welcome to Deep Noetics. Welcome to my first live stream. Um,
Second, if you count the test one we just did.
yeah, second
Um,
live stream. The other one was brilliant. You should check it out. Um, this is I've got James Cussen from the Living Philosophy with me here. He's even though I'm the one who studied tech, he's my tech mentor today. So yeah, we wanted to talk about power, was it?
Yeah, let's talk about power.
Because there's going to be an upcoming course on power, and I will be preparing for that course, and I will be doing more on this channel speaking about power. I will also be publishing more on my Substack, and this is so far the only proper way to support my work. So anyone wanting to do this, check out my Substack, support me there. And yes, so James, how have you been? Well,
I
do you
have
have do
been
you, yeah,
I've been brilliant. I've got a great way to start because I actually want to pull apart what your angle on power is. Like what is it that you're making a course about? Obviously, Foucault is the first thing that comes to mind as the most obvious person who talks about power for someone that's into postmodernism, but what else do you envision?
right. I'd like to characterize the study of power in being represented in two different camps, and one would be this more systemic analysis of power, which I would count Foucault under, but also Luhmann, if you know it. There, Luhmann also has written some about power.
So I've only come to Luhmann through his note-taking system, and I've just discovered that he's an amazing sociologist whose views I actually think I'm really gonna love. But
Right.
it's a funny, very angular thing because I've just been hearing so much about the Zettelkasten, and now that I've started doing the physical thing, everyone's constantly talking about Nicholas Luhmann, and now I'm like, oh, this guy's actually saying some shit that's interesting. It's not just some random sociologist. So
Right,
I've
right.
no idea what he's actually talking about, but it's yeah.
I can recommend the YouTube channels Carefree Wandering.
Oh yes, yeah. What's
He
his
has
name
a
again? Muller, is it?
yeah, Hans-Georg Müller. He's a friend of mine, and he's got a great series on media theory, and the last few parts of that series have been on Luhmann. I
Mm.
read his Reality of Mass Media as well, which was pretty interesting, especially because it's not like, I would just say, super critical. It's not focused on, like, for example, with Manufacturing Consent by Chomsky, where it's mainly focused on critiquing. It's generally focused on just analyzing. It's the reality
Mm.
of mass media. But that's besides the point now. I was talking about the more systemic theories of power, and the way Luhmann kind of plays into this is that power is seen as a sort of systemic medium. So you could say that there is a particular system, and a particular system always is operationally closed, meaning you can look at power within economic systems, within political or ideological or military systems. And the four I've just mentioned are the networks of power that the sociologist William Domhoff speaks about when studying power. And you can look at each of these systems, and operationally closed in this case means that they're structurally coupled. Power in one domain can correlate with power in another domain, but it doesn't directly operate on one another. So you can't win a battle in terms of military power, for example. You don't automatically win a battle if you are the richest person.
Mm.
For example, if you have the highest capital accumulation, it probably helps to be able to afford more weapons and all that. It's correlated, structurally coupled, but it's not the same rules. Like
Mm-hmm.
you are most powerful if you have the highest market cap, let's say, depending on your mode of analysis of economic power, but that doesn't necessarily translate one by one into military power. For
Mm-hmm.
example, that system applies
So
to
sorry, so it was economic, military, political was the third, was it? And what was
yes,
what was the fourth domain?
ideological.
Ideological. Okay, interesting.
Yes.
Oh, that's a nice spicy one to throw in for a fourth.
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
nice spicy one. Yeah. You could throw in like something like a technological as well, but technological, you'd have to build a careful case where it doesn't end up being just a special case for economical or something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, who do you think of as being technologically powerful right now? Who is not either politically, where that power isn't really a political thing or an economic thing or a yeah, it's almost more the means rather than the yeah, it's a tool rather than the thing itself.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so if you look at power as a medium in terms of system theory approaches, then you look at one of these systems, for example, let's take military power or political power, and there's a certain decision. So it's the medium is basically determined by its indeterminacy, or its openness, because a medium has degrees of freedom, meaning it can either go down one path or another, right? It can either contain a certain configuration or another configuration. That's kind of what is meant by a medium. It's something that holds other things, right?
Mhm.
And so if there's different configurations, let's take a very simple one: war or no war, right? You have a button that declares a war and one that remains a peace. And this situation is not determined. So they're in the particular system, let's say the political system, both is possible. There could be a war, there could be peace, there could be no war or negotiation, whatever. And whatever then ends up reducing that indeterminacy to an actual choice of these two, then is making use of power. Power is this medium that carries these two choices and then leads to universally valid decisions, right?
Okay, can we ground this in an example? So let's take the political sphere. What would be an example of something that would take us from indeterminacy to determinacy there?
Well, it depends obviously on the systems you're looking at. If you're looking at institutions, for example, you take the you take the Kremlin in Russia, right? You take different institutions in Russia, and then you have the Kremlin, right? You have an indeterminacy, invasion, non-invasion, right? We're not having a political discussion. This is just neutral analysis.
Where does a special military operation come between invasion and non-invasion?
I just thought maybe I should have taken a different example.
It becomes even more vague. Yeah. Well, let's take a hypothetical example where Russia was to invade Kazakhstan or some shit, and there's a choice to invade or not invade. Yeah.
Right. Invasion, non-invasion. So if there is a certain institution that basically reduces this medium, the degrees of freedom down to a single one, which is invasion, then you can trace back and deduce that that institution wields power, or wielded power in that instance, right?
So let's say the Americans during the Cold War launched a load of nuclear missiles at the Soviets, then they've more or less limited their options to, well, it's mutually assured destruction, so we have to also press this button. Would that be a kind of a, but then you trace back what caused the Americans to do that? And then you're following the chains of power, is it?
Yeah, in that sense, that's actually an interesting conclusion you'd have from that. In that sense, then during the Cold War, the Kremlin would have a certain amount of power over decisions in Washington and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
Because they'd both be respectively obliged to follow, with the mutual.
Yeah, they're tied together in some kind of power game.
Yeah. So this would be one way of conceptualizing systemic analysis of power. Obviously, if you focus more on, let's say, the type of system instead of like the power networks, like economics or politics, but you're focusing more on the respective components of the system. So if you're looking at institutions, or are you looking at individual people, are you looking at parties, then you'd get more into Foucaultian territory, where you would look at, schools and, these societies of discipline, disciplinary institutions, schools and mental asylums, hospitals, factories.
Prisons,
yeah.
So okay, what part of the course is this? So you're saying that one part of the course is looking at systemic forms of power, is it? What other?
The other one I would refer to, there's many ways to call it, but I would refer to it as Machiavellian theories of power. That one is different in its approach, as I'd say systemic theories, they kind of work as most scientific systemic theories, where they start with certain axioms, definitions, assumptions, and then try and deduce some sort of model. Whereas I would say Machiavellian theories, maybe I'm misunderstanding the methodology, how people arrived at them, but they look at historical patterns in the way power plays itself out. And so you could say in some way you could also call it Nietzschean in a way, because power becomes something, undefined and metaphysical in a sense. But you kind of look at patterns and cycles throughout history. So there's this famous iron law of oligarchy, where there's always been an elite, and that elite kind of cycles through the ages and through the rise and fall of empires. And I would say that iron law of oligarchy would be one example of a Machiavellian theory of power, right? The reason I'm saying Machiavellian is because there's this the Machiavellian approach, I would say, and it's also inspired by James Burnham, who wrote that book, The Machiavellians, referencing people like Pareto and Mosca, that he'd count among those as well. What they look at is basically just, we can't tell you exactly what power is in terms of some definition, but we can tell you how it works and how it historically grows and functions and what it does. And that helps you understand what's going on now, right? And
so is power will? Is it influence? Like what? Yeah, well, is that going to vary between that seems like that's a deep rabbit hole. I kind of want to just get more of an idea of the structure of this thing before we go down on what power actually is. So this is like is it a 6 or 8 week course? Is that what you did the last time?
Yeah, basically.
And do you plan on doing like systemic for like half it, or are these going to overlap, or what's the?
Yeah, so I would ideally ideally do systemic and the Machiavellian approach, and then try and tie them together, weave them together to some extent. I think the sort of synergy like that is the most fruitful and most powerful. And there is certain points where you can tie them together, specifically if you bring in Carl Schmitt. I don't know how familiar you are with Carl
Not
Schmitt.
at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a Carl Schmitt scholar either. However, there's 3, you could say, slogan-like concepts that are good to know and remember from Schmitt, because he's very influential, and even the fact that he was a member of the Nazi Party doesn't seem to cause much damage to his like legacy, because
But
he
was it
seems to.
like Lumen? So Lumen was a Nazi, but he was like a Hitler youth, so it doesn't really. It's kind of like, if you were brought in as a teenager, can you really be considered a Nazi? Like, was
No,
Schmidt
I
older, or was Schmidt was
yeah.
like proper? Was he? He was
I think
a
Schmidt is less ambiguous. Yeah,
right.
I think Schmidt is less ambiguous. It's like Heidegger, I guess.
Right. Okay. He
Yeah,
said some things.
yeah, he
Yeah.
said some, but just like with Heidegger, I think their influence has been so large that even devoted anti-fascists or devoted scholars today still study them. Their impact just can't be denied. And the 3 slogan-like things, and I think Schmitt scholars would probably say I'm selling him short here, but one important part is that the most important political distinction is that of friend and enemy. That is one important slogan of his, you could say, because essentially what a Machiavellian approach would imply is that there is no such thing as just pure power that's not being exerted, right? That's not being enforced in some way. So power has to, it's like you could compare it with physics. There's energy has to perform work for you to measure it, right? To see it. What is energy if it never performs any work, right? If there's and it's the same thing with power. Like, what is power if it's not actually being used, if it's not being exerted on others? And in that sense, so the understanding is, if you have an elite, then that elite employs a particular political formula, according to Pareto, which is, you could call it an ideology, you could call it a national civil religion or something, which justifies the power being used against the enemy of civil society, enemy of the state. That whatever that political formula implies a certain enemy, right? And the belief in that political formula by the wider society justifies the exertion of power that is currently held against that threat, right? Or against that enemy. And that brings us to the second principle in Carl Schmitt, and that is the sovereign, which is defined as he who decides over the state of emergency.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So there's certain laws that wider society has to stick to, but the true sovereign power can supersede that, right? And that is that state of emergency is actually more common than you think. So it's kind of paradoxical to say the state of emergency is quite common, but the state of emergency, or using a state of emergency to enforce whatever, is way more common than people think.
Do you mean more common in the, like, we talking the scale of years or decades or centuries?
It depends on the impactfulness, right? Like, for example, introducing passports was an emergency measure during the First World War, and we're still stuck with them, right? Or a lot of the
I mean,
heavy,
COVID is a good example of, there
yeah,
was a level of, there was a lot of state of emergency, like the lockdowns, and there was a lot of pulling out the the emergency card.
Right.
But yeah, is that, I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples. I guess Americans with the after 9/11 and all the, well, I mean, what would they call the Patriot Act, and
Yeah, yeah.
the now we still all get searched in airports because of this shit.
Yeah. I
Um,
was gonna mention that one. Yeah, exactly.
mm. Okay, so his second point is about the sovereign being the person who has the thing in the state of emergency. So is that an emergency is to be understood as happening more regularly than you might expect.
Right, yes. And the third one, which is kind of the basis for the title of one of his works, which is Political Theology, that is that our state institutions are just the secularization of religious institutions, right? So in
Say that
that
again. This our state institutions are secularization of religious institutions.
yeah. So
Interesting.
in that sense, the state more or less, or the sovereign power of the state more or less becomes God, so to say, because God is that which can override the law, right? There's natural law, but there's also God's will
Mm.
in that sense, right?
So this isn't just a theological religious map over. This is so like, because in that sense you could say the Pope, but you're actually going to more of a natural extent of, okay, like, so when you were talking about the religious map over, I was thinking, okay, so are we talking about the Christianity and the Pope is the head of this, and so we're talking about this hierarchical move over and the power that comes with that. But you're suggesting something, or Schmidt is suggesting something even
Yeah, I
more
don't,
there.
like I said, I haven't studied him in depth. I have read the Political Theology, but it's been a while. I don't want to
Mm.
mischaracterize him there. But what
He
what I
was a
was
Nazi. You can mischaracterize him as much as you want. I'm pretty sure that there's a carte blanche in the society to to say whatever the fuck
exactly.
you want.
Actually good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean the crucial distinction we have here now between this and the systemic theories of power is that the systemic theories of power, you kind of have to predefine some sort of system where power represents the medium, right? You have to say, oh, we've got the economic network that runs according to these rules. You have these, right? Whereas the Machiavellian theory doesn't require this. The Machiavellian theory just needs just requires basically to say a minority rules over a majority. And this is kind of like a fractal pattern. Like within that minority, there is another minority that rules over the majority.
Which is a
So
Pareto distribution of geometrically increasing well,
something like that. Yeah,
yeah,
I
geometrically
mean,
smaller amounts have greater and greater power down the chain, right?
yeah, that's why Pareto is counted among one of the Machiavellians, right?
That makes
And
sense.
and also you get that in something like George Orwell's 1984 with the inner party and the outer party, right? You've got the proles and then you've got the party, but then even within the party, you've got the inner party and the outer party.
So we're talking about the pyramid shape of the very neat pyramid of hierarchy on which the head of the, but then I guess it's three pyramids because of the three, well, Oceania, is it
Right.
Eurasia, and whatever the other one.
Yeah. At the
Yeah.
top you get big brother, right? But that so yeah, so essentially Big Brother is that's actually a good metaphor. Big Brother is this, quasi transcendent, you know, undescribable power,
Mm.
and that differentiates it obviously from a systemic, more rational analysis of power. And but it's nonetheless claims at least to be historically accurate. It nonetheless claims to describe power accurately historically, right? That
Mm.
there is a certain elite, regardless of whether it's from an economic network or like whether the people there are power have gained power through the economic network, the ideological, military, whatever. There is an elite, and the type of elite is irrelevant. That's why the biggest opponents of elite theories are pluralists, right? That want to look at interest groups and want to look at, complex. They're like they want to build up this whole complex system,
An
network.
ecosystem of power rather than a hierarchy.
Yes, right. And so there is these people in between, which I find an interesting bridge, such as William Domhoff, who I mentioned earlier. He is an elite theorist, but claims there's 4 networks, and the elite kind of accumulates out of these 4 networks, right? But yeah, that is kind of, it leads to more and more. If you go down that rabbit hole, it leads to more and more questions. The question is, okay, if there is an elite within the economic network, does it necessarily overlap, or does it necessarily converge with the elites of the other networks, or can they be separate?
Yes.
These are questions. You
So
can
is
see
it
that with Elon Musk, for example. He's a good example of someone who's probably in the economic elite, but not necessarily in the ideological elite, or what
but
I
you
mean.
could see the move of taking over Twitter as
An
definitely
attempt.
moving much more in that direction of, okay, we can now gain some level of much more ideological power, but also much more maybe political power through that.
Yeah, yeah.
So is the goal of the course to try and come to an understanding of power, or what is the overarching goal of it?
The goal of the course is, of course, to usher in a global revolution.
Cool. Let's start now. I've got a pitchfork.
Yeah, I've got the torches. Yeah, at least I got some candles.
It's going to be a half-hearted revolution.
Yeah, that'll have to do.
Yeah.
Maybe a lighter and deodorant. But
That was the modern take on it. Well, the torch you can carry around and smell good while burning the world down.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think so. There is this notion of the political illusion. There's a book by Jacques Ellul. I'm a big Ellul fan. I don't know if you're familiar with Ellul at all.
Never heard of him, no.
Yeah, he was like a French Christian anarchist, something really fun like that.
How do you spell his last name?
Ellul. And yeah, I can recommend The Political Illusion by Ellul. One of the, I'd say, more impactful works on me there, and almost all of what I've spoken about has kind of played into it. There's another work by this a YouTuber, academic agent, called Populist Delusion. I think that is in a similar vein. It's not as long. It's a thinner book. But like the titles are kind of similar, right? You've got the political illusion and the populist delusion.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they kind of the titles speak to why I'm interested in making a course like that, and that is that there seems to be a particular illusion about power. So power has a particular tendency of creating a mystique, and I'm not entirely sure to what extent it's gotten more extreme in our time, or to what extent it's even for the first time fully mysterious in our time, thanks to the age of mass media, right? That's
what do you mean by mysterious, or the mystique here?
Well, you could say the mystique is, first of all, how it actually comes about. You have, let's say, imagine yourself seeing the Emperor of Rome or something like that, right? So that's just a human, right? He's a human like you and I in the basic sense, right? Obviously, people wouldn't believe it back then. But, he's just standing there, and if you dare to do anything to him, you'll be killed. There is thousands of people there listening to that person, thousands of people there willing to sacrifice their life to that person, right? There's something eerie about this, right? I mean, there's something, for an average person that doesn't have this, that isn't born into this, there's something odd about it. If you suddenly walked out your house and there was people willing to die for you, that's, I don't know how famous you are. I don't know how famous you are.
You just wait till you get to 5,000 subscribers. That's when it really starts.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is, there's, you would be weirded out by that, right? It would be a very strange feeling, right? There's something odd and, magical about it.
I don't think. Yeah, the funny thing is, I actually don't think you would, unless you were really just dropped in it, unless it happened like overnight.
Right.
But I think, yeah. So there's something that's coming to my mind of like the neurochemical side of all this, where they did an experiment on, I think it was vervet monkeys, and they measured the serotonin of all the monkeys, and then they took the alpha monkey out, and his serotonin levels like plummeted, and all the serotonin levels in the group were going haywire until a new alpha emerged, and his serotonin levels came up, and then the rest of them started to reorganize, and then you reintroduce the original, and then it all goes back to the start. And it just seems like there's this scorecard that's been kept neurochemically that's tracking this, and there's all these associated traits with serotonin. The impulsiveness, the self-evaluation is extremely high, and there's an actionness. And it seems like there's something, it almost seems like a social glue that's causing it. So I think if your serotonin levels are high, then it's not going to seem odd to you that people are behaving in this way. It might be because you're going to have the neurochemical cocktail that's going to make this go, of course, I am where I am. Naturally, people would act a certain way. So
Yes.
I'm not actually sure. Yeah, the internal psychology of, I think the power shapes you, and there's a neurochemical evolutionary component to it that isn't just institutional and cultural, but that is kind of deeply wired. And so there's a way that power and the role and the individual, because like the it's not the person of the emperor that really those people are willing to die for. There's, and maybe this is what you're getting at with the mystique. There's a role there. There's
Yeah.
something that the person is kind of, there's a cloak that they're wearing,
Yes.
which is attached to. And is that what you mean by the mystique?
Yes. Yes. So there's this book which is kind of a parody by Thomas Carlyle. I don't know if you've ever
I'm
come
aware of
across.
Carlyle, but not
Yeah,
deeply.
he's
No.
written this book called Satyrs Artis, which is a parody kind of on German idealists. He speaks of this guy called von Teufelsdrück, which just kind of means the devil's manure or whatever.
Right, yeah.
But it's and he's like a philosopher of clothes, and he speaks about how, you know, we are just, you know, mortal exchangeable pieces of flesh that just come into being and then rot away, but the clothes we wear, they represent the actual kind of abstract the abstract society that underlies, you know,
Yeah.
the cycles of people going in and out of professions and in and out of their you know, jobs and duties and everyday life, right? And I suppose there's that to that, you know, you have this, the clothes make the emperor, right? Yeah, you have this,
Which sounds ridiculous, but I actually think that to a degree that is
yeah,
actually true. Yeah.
right, yeah. So you have this kind of institution where this, you know, you could say this human individual that is the emperor right now just kind of fills the
There's an
cloak.
abstract thing that is greater
Yeah,
than the emperor.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'd say the political illusion stems more from being outside of power. So what you just said may still apply with the comparison with the monkeys. If you're not the person with the high serotonin, right? If you are, you know, it reminds me more of like a social setting. So you have people that are more dominant and more confident and more popular and more, you know. And if you're not that, you know, it is like mysterious to you how that person does it. It seems almost magical that people just are drawn to that person,
Right.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
what they call a gravitas to them,
Mm.
right? Or Gustave Le Bon would call it the nimbus, right? Uh, and this I'd say is even more reinforced on the one hand through civilization with humans, because you have that situation where someone can have the power without you ever meeting him in your whole life, right? Which is different from the monkeys, right?
Say that. Sorry, go on.
The emperor can have that power
Mhm.
without you ever meeting the emperor in your life, right?
Mhm.
That probably wouldn't work with monkeys, right? Right. So
Yes, the serotonin would have to be probably or that would have to be directly socially mediated, but that seems like a limitation of their linguistic capabilities more than anything.
right, but I mean, there is that is also another source of that political illusion and that mystique. It is someone turns up, and they have power in your local place. They have power because they represent the emperor, who you'll never see, right? Which is a certain level of mystique, right? It is just,
So
it's
where
just
is the
the
mystique
emperor.
situated? Is because yeah, I'm having trouble locating the mystique. Is the mystique in your reaction to this person who has the power, or is it a mysticizing of power itself, or what is where is the mystique of power in that? So this will say the governor comes and the governor has power from the emperor. Where's the mystique there?
Well, the mystique on the one hand is what we've talked about just now, the mystique in that person, but it's also the it's also that kind of spellcasting or spellcasting magical formula that enables them to grant this authority, to gain this authority just by, let's say, by repeating or maintaining the uh the what's it called, the mandate or delegation they have obtained from the emperor, and by consequence the gods, right? And that's, you know, mirrored as well in the divine right of kings, and these things. And I would say, just on top of that, because Jacques Ellul is especially a philosopher of modernity and a critic of modernity, is that the political illusion has intensified to some extent, because you could say in some respect it has been honest to some degree. Like the emperor kind of just, you know, the power, if you say the emperor is in power, in many times that would have been accurate, roughly, right? That would have been the
There was a
case.
nakedness to that power.
Right, there was a nakedness to that power. The emperor could go somewhere and have someone executed on a whim, right? And the difference now is that you have, in the age of mass media, you have a shift of the source of information to a technological network that has started with the printing press but has kind of accelerated with radio, TV, and the internet, right? And on top of that, and that allowed kind of the maintenance of this so-called, you know, Enlightenment era liberal republic, liberal democracy, right? Which is a very, you could call it, it is a kind of meme. It is a kind of idea that is being sold, which doesn't, you know, it cannot be, as it is like a cultural agreement or a cultural meme, it cannot, it's not something that's objectively set somewhere, right? There's, you know, there's some connection maybe to the Attic democracy in Athens back then, or the Roman Republic, but these connections, you know, are in some sense superficial. You know, there's very big differences. And if you want to look at where power resides, you know, there's many different institutes and people that have studied it. You know, it often is, it often leads you, you know, the superficial view you'll get from mass media leads you to the wrong place, right? You will look for power in today's age, and, you know, it represented members of parliament, for example, in your local country. And many people nowadays realize or have the intuitive sense that that can't be it, right? That's where you get
Now, is that due
conspiracy.
to a decentralization of power, or do you think that that's due to a hiding of? Is there a sort of a disguise of where the power truly lies?
Yeah, I would say it's a paradoxical, like, double development. You know, Marshall McLuhan used to say that, you know, I think, was it one form of technology was uniting and decentralizing, and the other one was fragmenting but centralizing, which sounds like they're opposites each time,
What did he
right?
mean by that?
I'm not exactly sure, but like he was referring to old medium media in the first case and new media in the second case, right? And so I'm just making a comparison. I'm not bringing
Yeah.
McLuhan in here, but the that in a sense it has been way more centralized, and in another sense way more decentralized, right? Decentralized in the sense as we've just said, that it's kind of become it's kind of become that these networks actually have different branches. Like you look at economic power, and there is a very separate domain of, Wall Street and whatnot, whatever you want to call among these things, banks and Wall Street, and a separate domain for parliament and for government and all that, and a separate domain for your defense ministry and your defense institutions. And a lot of them, they have grown. There's international institutions. You could say they've decentralized in some sense, but then on the other hand, the rise of, you could say that the new Western empires, the British and then the American empire, was actually the rise of the modern rational absolute state with a full monopoly on power, a full monopoly on violence, which arguably was not the case in pre-modern times, right? Perhaps not everywhere. There's very centralized empires in antiquity, but in that sense, you had less centralized structures in the Middle Ages, with guilds having power over trade, which churches often couldn't fully infringe upon. Whereas any such rules and laws and regulations are now entirely in the responsibility of the state.
Of course, in Europe, it's a little bit, with the EU, it's a bit who's got who's got the regulatory power here, but I guess it's still ultimately statehood. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm still thinking about the McLuhan thing, because there's something in. Yeah, so I was saying to you in the email that I've been reading more. Well, I've been reading this guy Manuel de Landa, who's talking about Deleuze and Guattari's idea of the assemblage, and an assemblage being essentially something that's greater than the sum of its parts. So de Landa has kind of taken. So in Deleuze and Guattari, there's assemblages and there's strata, but de Landa is kind of saying, no, these are. Imagine you've got an organism, or you've got an entity, and it's got two knobs attached, and one of them is territorialization and one of them is codification. And when you turn codification up to the maximum, it becomes a strata. So an assemblage, it can be more territorialized, which you can think of territorialization as the kind of reputational storage of our reputations, the duties that we're bound to have, the interactions that we have that bring us more and more together. And these are more organic things, like we had an email saying we'd talk at this time, so I was like, okay, I better show up at this time, otherwise there's going to be some kind of reputational cost there. Even though technically you could say there'd be no cost, but there is a cost. So there's kind of there's these chains that bind us that are loose, but it's not codified. So the codified would be the 10 commandments. It's the regulations. It's you have to follow this, or else there's a sort of threat of punishment.
Right.
And so it's what seems to have happened is the deterritorialization, like with territorialization now, has just been turned down to the maximum. So you've got, rather than this super hierarchical thing in medieval, and sure, power was decentralized, but it was very clear where the hierarchy lay, and you come all the way up to the king. And as you were saying earlier, there was this nakedness to the power. And so that was highly structured, it was clear that this entire thing worked as a whole. Whereas now, with the rise of what I've been exploring recently is with the rise of equality, the idea of egalitarianism and democracy obviously just being an embodiment of that. You've just got the entire thing pulling apart. And now, instead of all of us playing the same power game, there's a sort of a disintegration into these echo chambers, into these subcultures, and then these are kind of going to war. And so the entire culture is fighting for something that's unclear. Is it are they fighting to be king of the hill? Are we fighting to have our agenda held over the rest of society, and so we're trying to dominate the others, or what's going on? But it seems, rather than having an assemblage of a nation or a society, we've got all these individual wholes. Like we're getting and we seem to be in multiple ones at once. So you could say there's the
Yeah.
4chan kind of group in one sort of assemblage. You've got the leftists of Tumblr kind of emerging onto Twitter in another one, but then once they're on Twitter, you've just got this. Well, what is what? Is Twitter the free speech party for the free speech institution? That was what the head of Twitter said back in 2012, and then it just became, well, this is not free speech. So it just seems, yeah, there's a vastness to power, but it seems to be disintegrating. And so the McLuhan thing seems to hit something, even though obviously he's not talking about the internet. There seems to be something even more, I don't know, poignant about that, where there's just this increasing fragmentation, and it's hard to tell if it's these high ideals and the world is becoming better, more equality, more freedom, more rights, but then it's also leading to, I think there's an instability in the system because it's not rigid enough. And I'm wondering whether a more rigid power system will emerge. And this kind of comes through the idea of liminality, of this structure, and then structure kind of breaks down, and you've got this fluid part where in ritualistic and tribal ritualistic settings, this is where this originally comes from with Victor Turner's work. You've got the structure of like rigid hierarchy and rigid structures and roles that everyone plays. You go through a liminal ritual in which your role is changed. So you go from being a boy to being a man. You go from being a normal person into being an elder, or into being the not king but the chief. And then, but structure is always at the other end of that in between liminal phase. And the liminality is treated like it's like a decontamination chamber. Like you spend 2 weeks apart from the tribe in between, and 2 weeks or up to 2 months apart from the tribe after. So there's like this, we don't want someone that's tainted with the freedom and liberalism of this liminal state to come back to structure. So you want to come down from that ecstatic high of that experience. And I'm wondering whether all of modernity has just been this ecstatic liminal phase. And while capitalistic bourgeois modernity can outcompete any other form of societal structure, it seems, although China is ambiguous as to whether, but still, but yeah, I'm wondering whether the structure has to bounce back at some point, and whether it's evolutionarily more adaptive and can outcompete in the short term, but whether long term it's doomed to like disintegrate and to fall into some sort of, we can call it a dark age, but back into a more rigidly structured thing. So it's like a game of musical chairs, and you just wait until the end, and then this is the person who's got, this is the new oligarchy that's going to hold power for a long time after.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
kind of the angles that I'm approaching it with at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing with these questions is as well that to bring it back as well to the elite theory is that they don't. That's another example where elite theory wouldn't actually make any distinction between now, for example, China or bourgeois capitalism or whatever else, even between the West and the Soviet Union, they would refer to all of this as a sort of managerial system or managerial bureaucracy with different flavors of that, right? With just different ways of managerialism, right?
But is that a bracket in it for the sake of a particular type of analysis, or is that a dismissal of those distinctions? Is it saying these distinctions are trivial, or is it saying these distinctions are not what we're studying? They're not relevant to the particular analysis of. Yeah, it's not. Are they saying it's not relevant to power at all, or just to this variation of power, this element of power that we're trying to like hone in on, which is the elite element?
Yeah, it's not what it's more to say it's not what we're studying, but it's also it focuses on doing the right distinctions, right? So like there is a managerial class, a managerial bureaucratic class, they actually are what comes after the classic bourgeois capitalism. The classic bourgeois capitalism is, so to say, a ghost, or like an image of the past, which has been replaced latest in the early 20th century, if not before that, because you see, especially with things like the New Deal in the United States, you see actually big government driving a lot of things, driving the development of the internet, driving the development of the whole modern national security state that we know nowadays. All of
But
these
is that
different
just
things.
not just as long as Keynesian economics was ruling?
Yeah,
Keynesian,
you could say, but
you know the one.
Keynesian, you can see that actually as a sort of part of a of managerial ideology,
But
right?
then
It's
with the emergence of neoliberalism in the 1980s, are
yeah,
we not seeing that that big system has kind of collapsed, and then there's been a
yeah.
deterritorialization and a release of energies, or what do you see there?
Well, I mean, the let's say that the ruling class in the quote unquote neoliberal age would be seen as something like a managerial class as well. It is no longer the driving powerful class is no longer proprietors. It's no longer people who own certain shares or own something. It's the administrators, the managers. That is the claim there, and that hasn't really changed. That it's again a kind of reform, internal reform within a managerial class, but it hasn't one has not treated the other as a partisan enemy in the Schmittian sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But power is still shifted. So like the dynamics, because it just seems to me of like speaking about a managerial class. I mean, could you not describe chiefs and elders as a managerial class? Like, is
Well, I mean, it depends on how much you want to stretch out certain definitions, right? It's just like people speaking about ideologies in antiquity. It's like, do you want to use the term like that, or do you want to claim ideology is something that came about after the end of religion,
mm,
dominating our societies? And it's the same thing with the managerial class talk, right? It's in its definition, and people like Burnham, with people like Burnham or Sam Francis, I think it's more focused on distinguishing the current elite from the preceding elite, which is this classical bourgeois capitalist elite, right?
so the
Whereas
managerial class is seen as this new thing since the 1920s. This since New Deal Keynesian kind of emergence of that economic model, that was
yes,
a qualitative shift from bourgeois capitalism into something more managerial.
yes, it's kind of, if you look at especially in the 1920s, if you look at scientists in the time, there's this movie Oppenheimer was out recently.
Mm-hmm.
The smartest people were like communists, they were Marxists, communists. The smartest academics and scientists and whatever, they were, and these people were given responsibilities, governing responsibilities, especially in the 20s, 30s, and then officially basically became like the economy became something that was managed by the state to a large extent in the New Deal, and it was managed to a large extent in the Soviet Union, but it was a different kind of managerial policy, you could say, but it was nonetheless a sort of managerial bureaucracy, right? Which was different from a state that was mainly there for, external, internal security, maintaining contracts and all that, right?
So the argument would be that that like that Soviet state and the New Deal state are more alike to each other than would say the New Deal state is to the bourgeois capitalist state that preceded it.
Yes, or for example, the uh, the what's it called, the Wilhelm Empire in Germany, which was like a bit of a hybrid. It was trying to catch up with the it was trying to catch up with industrialization, so they kind of did engage in some sort of managerial activity, but still trying to keep it under a medieval style empire umbrella, right?
Is this
Um,
Prussian Empire, like late 19th century, or what do we what?
yeah,
Right,
1871 to 1919, that ended in the First World War, right?
right, yeah.
For example, right? And then yeah, you had a Western style. um you could say then you have the extreme form of like a wild bourgeois economy with the Weimar Republic, and then turning into a, again, a hybrid. Germany is always like Germany's always hated for people who make theories like this because they always fall out of these categories. They don't fit neatly into these
Yeah.
categories because on the one hand, they didn't engage in the same development at the same time as Britain, United States, and all that. And on the other hand, they always caught up with it either quickly or caught up so quickly that they overtook them in some parts, right? But then used it for other purposes, just like in the Prussian Empire, basically building up a modern state under the umbrella of a medieval structure, you could say. And then in the Third Reich, basically building up a managerial state, a fully, you could say, modern managerial state, but weaponizing it for a very archaic pre-modern value, right? Tribal value, you could say.
So let's where does the Third Reich kind of come into this? Is that different in terms of these forms of power, in terms of the managerial thing? Is that something different?
It's yeah, you would see it as different, and like that would kind of, it's always difficult to not engage in post hoc rationalization of history, right? But that would kind of explain the alliance against the Third Reich, for example. It would argue that it is, to some extent, a managerial state as well, but it kind of used, just in parts, it used this sort of system as a weapon to actually smash the goals of modernity, against the goals of
So
modernity.
the managerial state is kind of about the fulfillment of the goals of modernity. It's very much an Enlightenment era kind of project.
Yes, you could say, you could see it in a Hegelian dialectical way, right? The managerial state is the synthesis of a bourgeois capitalism and a rising Marxist socialist ideology, right? And none of them can exist in its pure form, and then they kind of synthesize into this managerial system, right? And
but what was going on before the 1920s then? Because I guess I'm not fully understanding how what shifted that was so dramatic. Were there no, so obviously regulation is one element of it, the state taking more power with New Deal and taking more power over the economy, and also bringing in, I guess, social welfare programs. Is that kind of the big change of like the introduction of these? It's not just everyone fending for themselves. We're actually big brother or big daddy, and we're gonna like look after you a little bit and kind of like prepare you to be the best to have this whole assemblage work best together.
Yeah, I mean, if we stick to this Machiavellian scheme, then you can't actually give proper analytical reasons for why A led to B. You can only speak in these historical patterns. So for example, if another elite comes to power, it would often be due to the former enemy having been defeated, you could say, and there being no chance of there being no way of maintaining the
Keep your
formula.
concentration.
Yeah.
The multitasking not working
well. Maintaining the what's it called, the political formula I spoke about earlier. So for example, you have a political formula that justifies having a particular enemy, but if that enemy is not believable anymore, right? If that enemy is kind of already defeated, the political formula loses its effect, and then the current justification for the current rule also loses its effect. So in that sense, you could say, why did the regular bourgeois capitalist class, why did that go away? It's basically because their enemy had been defeated. It couldn't really mobilize people by revolting against the nobility and the church. That didn't work anymore. The nobility and the church had already become irrelevant, right? And especially in a country like the United States. And so then at that point it would just be too weak. It was just weak enough to then be replaced, at some
It
point.
couldn't serve as yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, at some point, you have, if you have huge investors, basically, in Washington, New York, whatever, basically buying up politics like a mafia, then it's you can't really justify that well anymore with the fact that they revolted against the British Empire 200 years ago or something. That's not really, the political formula doesn't work anymore. And then you had the successive regulation and removal of these positions of power and replacement with professional lobbyists, professional bureaucrats, professional, right? And that's how it gave rise to that. And there's no specific analytic systemic explanation to that. It's just kind of the way the cycle goes, right? At some point, managerialism will also have run its course, right?
So I'm curious to see where you think fascism would fit in this mold. Obviously, there is a very large state element involved, and that it's kind of a massive New Deal project in a way, kind of bigger than the New Deal.
Yeah, Joseph Goebbels famously praised Franklin Roosevelt as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is a special case in that sense that it represents just like the Soviet Union or the United States, or it represents a form of managerialism. It represents a flavor of managerialism, you could say. Only that it often is particularized. It is often particular to a certain value. Either it's particular to this superior race, you could say, or it's particular to this people, to this religion. You can have religious theocratic fascism, whatever. It's often particularized, and then this particularization often refers to a value that is pre-modern, which the other versions that won in the world wars aren't. And arguably, that is the reason why they won, right? Because you kind of have to, from the view of a fascist, you're making a deal with the devil in a sense. You kind of have to, you're employing the methods of modernity in order to defend a pre-modern value, a value that was actually that modernity is fighting against. So you're kind of.
What do you think that value is? Like, what do you mean there?
Well, for example, the coherency of a people tied to blood and soil, where you could say radical territorialization, right? Which maybe to some extent was common, not common because of the lack of technology, pre-modernity, and that is no longer feasible. Both the Soviet Union as well as the United States are a very international, multicultural state. I mean, obviously a lot of problems, obviously, especially in the United States, there was historically a dominance of a particular demographic, whatever, white male Christian, and you can see now with the managerial class that this original imperial colonial white male demographic has become the icon of the partisan enemy that it seeks to destroy. And the culture wars I would see as a symptom of the fact that enemy is becoming less credible, right?
The idea of white man,
the
powerful
white
colonial,
the powerful white colonials, it's becoming less credible the more the only ones remaining with that kind of power are very old, right? Right. And the more the successive managerial leaders are no longer fit into that category, right?
Yeah, I'm really curious about the fascist thing. So there's two different directions of going here. So one direction that occurs to me is, I kind of want to follow I'm fascinated by the fascist thing at the moment because I really see that energy rising again in the form of populism, obviously stripped of the militia element. But there is some kind of I don't know, did you hear about the riots in Ireland last week?
Yes, yeah.
There's a massive anti-immigration thing, and it's it seems to be spreading, but silently. So I have a friend he'd be a tradesman, so he'd be going around to random people's houses, doing work on their houses, and he said there's a lot of talk. Like he goes to a lot of different places, a lot of different people talking in this way of just this thing of like, oh, you can't say this in polite society, but and so it seems like there's an energy spreading, and kind of like Brexit or Trump, it's not going to show up in any polls. And so there's like this demon. Remember Jung characterized what was going on in the German psyche as the blonde beast in the underground prison. And that seems to be sort of awakening. And you could see Trump, you could see Brexit, you could see these anti globalized kind of movements. And I think there's a big rise in anti-globalization, which seems to be tilting us back towards a re-territorialization. I think the mental health crisis coming from a massive deterritorialization where we're too free, where we're free and we're in competition with a million different people on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. And so there's this death of community, there's the death of connection to something solid and tangible rather than being drawn into this abstract space. And so it seems like fascism, while appealing to a pre-modern, I would argue not you could call it pre-modern, but that suggests that it's inherently reactionary or regressive rather than trying to get back to something that's missing. And so I think that there's something in that space that's waking up, and it fascinates me because, first of all, it's terrifying because I've been learning. So oxytocin, the popularly known as the cuddle hormone. It's a neurochemical. It's also the genocide hormone. So it's basically the in-group out-group dynamics. So the more oxytocin you feel, the more that it's released, the tighter your in-group is, meaning the more out the out-group is.
Right.
And I think I've been playing around with the idea that what was happening in fascist societies is that the oxytocin levels rose massively as the sense of community and this bonding together into the in-group got so tight. But maybe that only got so tight because of the out-group. The out-group was always a very strong element for the previous 7 or 10 centuries, I guess. So there's that tension of like, okay, is it an in-group out-group thing? And so if this thing is going to emerge again, you're only going to see is it going to bring a similar level of out-group dynamics, which is terrifying. But I also, looking at the mental health crisis, looking at the state of society and this disintegration and fragmentation, I feel like there's something in that. There's a baby in that bathwater of like, we need a greater community. We need a greater reunifying if this system is going to have any kind of longevity, because it seems like there's too many interests pulling it in too many different ways. The fragmentation is leading to a load of smaller tribes just warring with each other. And it kind of brings to mind like ancient Greece. You had Athens and Sparta and Corinth. And then it was just this outsider, Macedonia, who came in and said, you're all fighting amongst yourselves. I'm just going to take over because your fragmentation isn't really serving. This noble ideal that you had that managed to topple the world's greatest empire, let me just swoop in here and take that over from you. And so I wonder whether there's these kind of dynamics at play on some level. The fragmentation, it seems like you're undefeatable when you're Athens or when you're Sparta, you only think in terms of Athens and Sparta. In China and Russia, or China and America, or maybe it's China or America and Russia and China is the new thing. But it just seems like this fragmentation ultimately makes the system weak and doesn't make it last over a long period of time. And so, I guess I just see all these dynamics coming up, and I'm trying to get more concepts into my mind to try and piece together what the fuck is going on,
right?
And to try and see some of like, okay, what's going to help what, and what are the risks and what are the costs. Because right now it just seems we're in a very delicate historical moment. Like modernity is coming into some kind of a new cyclical thing where there's a dragon beginning to wake up, and it's like, this could be fucking nasty, especially now that we've got nuclear weapons. And the emergence of AI, super technological in the military industrial complex, is also the stakes are much higher this time round. And it's trying to get ahead of that in some way, or trying to see what's coming around the corner based on looking at these historical patterns?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always good to look at these paradoxical opposites that are coming together that I mentioned earlier with McLuhan as well. I'd say Deleuze speaks of that as well in the Society of Control, where he says that the society of control is determined by an extreme form of liberation and restriction at the same time.
Mm.
In the same sense, you know, we spoke earlier of decentralization and unification, at the same time centralization and fragmentation. And you can see it in the technology. You could say, for example, the computer is a decentralization of media. You know, you have the internet rising with it, but at the same time, it was a unification of your Walkman and your faxing machine and your whatever calculator and all these things coming together, right? In the same sense, if you look at the movements now, you have a sort of reaction to this globalism, to this, you know, to this global managerial system, you could say, but it's fragmenting in a sense. So like you could say the reaction to it represents a fragmentation of that global system within that global system, right? It's something that's not reversible. They're not, you know, they're not going to go back to the national empires of pre-Second World War times or the First World War times, right? It's not reversible. It's actually fragmentation of an already successful global takeover, right? And this fragmentation at the same time, you know, happens to be somehow at the same time centralizing in some sense. You know, you're centralizing back together around some sort of common value, common core. And the question here is, you know, is it a sort of, you could say, attempt at reigniting whatever happened with fascism back? Like when I was speaking of fascism earlier, I spoke fascism with a capital F, so the historical fascism, not with a small f, where you could say, you know, in a
the
broad
populist,
terms.
yeah, more.
Is it something like, you know, attempting, and according to, you know, the principles of power, you could say there is no such thing, there's no such turning back. Like if it is something like that, then it's bound to fail. It's bound to be a temporary, you know, a temporary upheaval, and then it's over. But however, it could also mean something else.
So is in that perspective, were the fascists destined to lose?
Well, that's a separate question. I'm saying if you're trying to rebuild the fascism that has lost as it was, you are destined to lose.
Oh yeah, okay,
right. I would say that's another question, but in some sense you could say yes, because like I said, whilst you could say the Soviet Union and the United States were more pure managerial systems, a lot of the fascist states were kind of hybrids that were at odds, that were internally contradictory in a sense, right? Like I said, because they'd often want to weaponize modernity in order to defend pre-modernity in a sense, right? But coming back to things now, you often see a change of power dynamics alongside a change of the medium, of the dominant mass media, right? So as power is a medium, the medium is also a medium. It is also a message, right? And you could say that potentially something else is happening. Potentially either the managerial system in itself, or this version or this generation of the managerial system is expiring. Potentially their political formula, the dominant political formula, which you could call woke or wokeism or whatever, is potentially expiring. The bad guy, the villain, the partisan enemy of the woke is no longer credibly a threat. You know, and so they focus more on, you know, the rise of right-wing populism, of white supremacy, of whatever, making it still questionable to what extent that rise is actually feasible or happening, you know, the way it existed in the past. I'd be very surprised if any movement would come close to, if any genuinely white supremacist movement would come anywhere close to the ones that existed in the past, right?
Yeah, I don't think white supremacy, but yeah, I guess that would be inherent in the nationalistic and Western westernized
Well, it
anti-immigration element.
depends. It depends. I suppose I think Ireland is actually a great example of, you know, a long tradition of nationalism that wasn't that was essentially not imperialist and white supremacist. It was actually in resistance to imperialism.
Mm,
You see other examples today as well. You could say Palestinian liberation movement or whatever, or Kurdish. These are
mm,
nationalisms that are inherently anti-imperialist. So yeah, so that's a different topic, but you could say that with the rise of the internet, and that's kind of where this rise of Trump, for example, came from. There may be a new viable, you know, elite uh, coming to power, coming to rise, which, you know, could take a while. We could still be at the beginning or whatever. Something like that
mm,
could be taking place as the former iteration of the managerial class, or the managerial class itself is kind of running out of steam
mm,
with its ideological grip through its political formula. You could say the political formula was way more powerful in the times of, you know, you could say classical liberalism, in the times of, you know, what's called civil rights movements and all that. There it had a strong pull to it, and what is left of it, you could say, is this woke culture and the rise of resistance to that online, whether, you know, you favor it or don't, is already potentially a symptom of, you know, it cracking, you know, of it
mm.
kind of cracking. But you can't return, you know, the anti-woke, the majority of the anti-woke stuff is not reversing any of the civil rights. They're not in favor of, you know,
No, it's
like,
pushing on to something else. It's more
yeah,
concerned with a present war rather than a reactionary, let's go back to 1955 kind of thing. Yeah.
yes, and then yeah, who knows what emergent technologies will allow for that, you know, will be more efficient, will be more
Yeah, I mean, if the internet led to first Obama and then Trump, maybe AI will, if all the hype around AI is any bit accurate and that it's going to be as big a shakeup as the internet was, then probably you're going to see another wave in 20, 30 years time of, or maybe in a shorter time window of a completely different upsurge of power. Even as this internet one is still playing itself out, you're going to maybe have this new wave that's going to start interfering. Things are speeding up uh, a lot.
first
And
AI president when it's
yeah,
just all
that'll be
deep fakes. No, he's like the AI president is just like an interview with Tucker Carlson never happened.
deep fakes all the way down. Yeah.
Deep fakes all the way. No one notices. They vote for it.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, I'm sure we could go on like this for hours. We should have another talk before your course though.
Yeah, definitely.
It's an interesting. How much of it have you put together? How much is it a work in progress?
Yeah, well, I've already, you know, filled my books with a lot of notes. I've read a lot of it. There's still some reading I need to do for it. I
Mm,
want to get into de Juvenel. Bertrand de Juvenel wrote a book called On Power, which I will need to get through. And yeah, I will then soon start setting up, writing the first lectures and
mm,
recording them. And
that's
yeah,
cool.
and it'll just go along like that. And yeah, then it'll
So you
soon
have
be
all the base materials basically. You've basically all the
yes,
reading done, and now it's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
corralling it
yeah,
into a form. Yeah.
exactly.
Cool. Well, we will definitely chat more as that form begins to take place. But are you planning? Did you say earlier June? Were you thinking
Yes, it's
mid 2024?
presumably June. Well, it hasn't been officially announced at it's at Halcyon Guild again with my colleague and friend Johannes Niederhauser. He runs that, and yeah, it's not officially announced on Halcyon Guild yet, but it will soon, and
Mm,
then people can soon register for that. And yeah, I will be getting into this way more since I'm finished with the current phase of my academic career. I'll be getting more into
yes,
into
yes.
working on this as well,
Yeah.
doing some more independent stuff. I really do enjoy doing that.
And do you plan on rerunning the course you did last year, the one on the machine?
Probably at some point, yes, probably at some point, but
Mm.
that's not
That's not
set.
your, yeah, that's not
Yeah,
on the
that's
agenda just yet. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, and I will, and hopefully we'll get it sorted next year as well to meet up in Ireland at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
climb the reek.
So you just
Still,
you just got too sick this year, was it?
yeah, it didn't work out. I got sick when I was there. Wasn't there for long enough either. I just didn't work out that well. Tried to be
Yeah.
there once a year, but we'll manage next year.
Next year, yeah. I'd like to do another climb of the
Yeah,
old Reek. Yeah.
yeah. I
Wait,
mean,
were you actually going to do Reek Sunday?
um,
Like,
maybe. I mean,
was that the plan this year? Were you there for that week?
I was no, I wasn't there for that week, but I was
Yeah.
there when you were not there. Remember?
Yes, when I was going to, I actually
Yeah.
ended up not going to Nuremberg. I was
Oh,
like,
really?
I'm too busy, and also I think it's going to be a party, and I don't think I can. What was I thinking? I don't do parties. Like an intense, like yeah. I was just like, what am I? This is crazy. So like I really wanted to see my friend, and then I was like, oh, I had a lot of things going on, so I was like, okay, I'm too busy. And then I was like, this is also a convenient excuse for what I yeah. It just dawned on me that I was like, oh, isn't this the kind of thing I vowed to myself I'm not going to do anymore because I
Right,
don't enjoy these environments?
right.
But
I
there's
see.
part of me been like, maybe this time it'll be fun.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, so
You mean like loud music and drinking and
loud music and having to shout to because what happens is I will try and have a conversation with someone and then it's super loud and then I'll say something, they'll go, what? I'll say it again, they'll go, what? And then I'm like, it wasn't worth it. Like
yeah,
what I was saying wasn't interesting enough the first
yeah,
time. It was just like idle chat. Yeah, it's so I just yeah, I
yeah.
tend not to enjoy like
You're not gonna explain liminality to them.
no.
And-
I survived in those environments when I used to drink very heavily.
Mhm.
Like in my student years, I would drink very heavily just to like, and then in my kind of like, let's say, coming 23, 24, I was just like, oh yeah, I hate those things. I, that's why I'm drinking. So I'm just going to stop drinking and stop going to those
Yeah.
environments. And that's going to work pretty well for me.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, it's like,
still going strong.
I'd love to come, but I don't want to. It's
Yeah,
like basically.
but it wasn't. I don't know why that wasn't my instinct. You know what I mean? I think it was just, oh, you're having your birthday. Oh, that sounds cool. I'll come over.
Yeah.
And then it only dawned on me later that I was like, oh yeah, no, with there. Remember, you don't like these environments. Why did you
Right.
not think about the? Yeah, I thought about seeing the friend, but not about the what the environment would be. So I must
Right.
go over again and visit properly
Yeah.
because I haven't been over since 20. I was over in 2021,
Mhm.
but yeah, we're pretty much would have been swapping.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
You come to Ireland, I go to Germany.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Well, next time you're visiting Germany, you can stop by.
are you still you're in Munich?
Yeah.
Is it pronounced München? Is that the
Yeah.
German?
München. Yeah.
Why is it Munich in English then?
Don't know.
That seems that's not
Nuremberg is Nürnberg in
no
German.
yeah.
Cologne is Köln.
Yeah. We just
It's
yeah.
just like that.
We can't say that. We'll make up our own word. It's
Yeah.
fine. We'll
That's how you do it. I mean,
yeah.
the Germans do it. I mean, California is Californian in German.
Oh yeah,
So
but
different.
that's pretty close.
It's
But yeah,
similar.
I guess you're still changing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. That answers that then. Yeah, this has been cool. Glad to be on your first live stream. If we're still
Yeah.
live streaming.
I wonder, I can't, the problem is like, I can't even check on Zoom, like any comments or
Yeah.
who's watching.
There's a bit
That's
of
kind of,
fine tuning
it's not,
here.
yeah, it's not exactly optimal to have it that way, but,
Yeah.
wait, actually, let me just bear with me for like 1 minute. Let me just in case someone
A comment or a
has left a comment. We want to be accommodating. We want to be accommodating enough. Oh yeah, there is actually small comment. As technology shapes our dreams, we face paradox. What? The hope for a fair and equal society fades further away. Instead of being flexible and spontaneous, we become rigid and controlled. Thanks, Upcycle Club. Oh, that
Nice.
must be Harry's. He was in my last course. I think
Cool.
Upcycle Club is Harry's. So I don't know if he's still watching, but yeah,
We had a watcher. We had someone.
we had someone watching. Yeah, great. All right. I think next time it's probably best to like what's it like? Put an announcement for a live stream
Yeah,
happening.
I mean,
Have it more in the
you had no
evening.
intention of, yeah.
Yeah,
This was not planned at all. This was,
yeah. Probably I gotta get into this game a bit more. But yeah,
yeah, but at least you've gotten like I wouldn't have done that where you were just like, oh, it's live. I guess we just keep going and it's live. I was like, what? I would have figured out how to do it. I
yeah.
would have procrastinated it for a few weeks, and then I'd be like, okay, no, I've got it all set up. It's
That
fine.
was my plan. That was my plan. The thing was, I got stuck in Hamburg because of a snowstorm. I didn't get back here. I wanted to come back here and sort everything, but instead I took the only train that wasn't cancelled, and that took 14 hours across the night.
Wow.
And so the few hours I just decided I'd sleep instead of preparing this. Yeah.
Isn't Hamburg up in the very north?
Yeah.
Oh, so you have to basically go the length of Germany then.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. 14-hour train. That's fun.
Yeah. I can imagine better things, but it could have been worse.
Yeah.
That's the Irish way of thinking.
It was grand. It was grand.
It was grand. That's the difference between Germans and Irish people. Is there's a saying in German that says "Es hätte nicht schlimmer kommen können," like it couldn't have been any worse.
That's so dramatic.
In Ireland, it's the opposite. Anything happens, and sure, it could have been worse.
It's somehow all the opposite comments applied to the exact same things.
Right. Yeah, it's like my house burnt down. At least no one was in it.
At least only the kids were in there. You know? Could have been worse. I could have been in there, and then no one could bury them. You know.
Right. My cat.
And that would be the darkness of the Irish humor of the
the dark side. That's true. All right. Thanks a million, James. It was a lovely chat as always, and very entertaining as well.
Yeah, thanks.
I like that we keep it light.
Yeah, always. Yeah.